The Vickers Mk VI opens our list because, quite simply, it entered World War II already outdated. Designed in the 1930s as a light reconnaissance tank, it carried almost no real armor protection, just a few millimeters of plate that could be punched through by rifles, anti-tank rifles, artillery fragments, and honestly, even bad luck. Its main armament wasn't a cannon at all, but a pair of machine guns that were perfectly adequate for colonial policing but practically useless against modern German armor. Yet, in spite of its weaknesses, the Mk6 wasn't completely worthless. It was fast, easy to maintain, and served a critical role in early British campaigns as a scouting and screening vehicle. Against infantry or in open desert recon, it could still do the job, just not the job Britain wished it could do against panzer divisions. What really puts it at the bottom of this ranking is the timing. By 1940, tank warfare had already evolved past the Mk6 capabilities, and the little machine that belonged to the 1930s found itself on a battlefield that had moved on. But don't blink, because every tank above this is significantly more capable, and the gap only gets wider from here. Few Allied tanks are as lovable and simultaneously as flawed as the M3 Stuart. When it first arrived on the battlefield in 1941, it felt like a revelation. Fast, mechanically reliable, and able to dart across open terrain far quicker than anything the British had been using. Compared to the fragile pre-war designs it replaced, the Stuart looked and felt like the future. But speed came with a price. The Stuart's 37mm cannon was already outdated the moment it rolled into North Africa. Against early German Panzer IIIs, it could still hold its own, but as armor thickness increased, the little Stuart found itself bouncing shells off anything larger than a medium tank. Crews quickly learned that the Stuart's best defense was simply not getting hit. Yet the tank earned genuine respect for its agility, survivability, and its ability to take punishment and keep moving, especially in the Pacific, where Japanese armor was lighter, and the Stuart suddenly felt like a heavyweight champion. In the grand ranking of Allied tanks, the M3 Stuart earns its spot above the Vickers Mk VI because it actually could contribute to combined arms operations. But in terms of raw firepower and battlefield dominance, it still had a long way to go. And that's where our next entry comes in. A British design that tried to combine speed with firepower and didn't always succeed. The Cruiser Mk IV represents Britain's early war dream. A fast, hard-hitting tank designed to race across open terrain, flank enemy formations, and punch through weak points with speed rather than brute force. On paper, it had everything it needed to succeed. High velocity, a capable 2-pounder gun, and a suspension system borrowed from the legendary Christie designs that kept it nimble across rough desert landscapes. But in practice, the Cruiser Mk IV was a mechanical diva. Its engine and drivetrain were notoriously temperamental, often breaking down long before it ever reached enemy contact. British tank crews joked that the cruiser didn't need enemy fire to be destroyed. It would sabotage itself just fine. Add to this its lack of high-explosive shells, and the tank struggled in roles beyond tank versus tank combat. Against infantry, anti-tank guns, or defensive positions, the cruiser simply didn't have the tools it needed. Still, the tank earns this spot above the Stuart because its gun, though flawed, could actually threaten early and mid-war German armor. In the early desert battles of 1940 and 1941, Cruiser Mk IVs were often the first British vehicles capable of standing toe-to-toe with Panzer IIIs. Ultimately, the Cruiser Mk IV marks an important evolutionary step: fast, aggressive, and forward-thinking, but unreliable. It set the stage for a British tank that fixed many of these issues later in the war, and yes, that one ranks much higher in this list. Next up, a tank so strange-looking it practically needs a warning label. But it played a surprisingly important role in the early war. If you took every tank designer in 1940, locked them in a room, and told them to create a medium tank as fast as possible, you'd get something that looks suspiciously like the M3 Lee. It's a machine that feels part genius, part accident, and part, we didn't have time to build a turret big enough for a 75mm gun. The result? A tank with a massive hull-mounted 75mm cannon fixed in a side sponson, a smaller 37mm gun in a separate turret, and a silhouette so tall it looked like it should come with an elevator in a rooftop cafe. German crews famously nicknamed it the skyscraper. And yet, it worked. In North Africa, the Lee and Grant brought something desperately needed to the battlefield: a 75mm gun capable of engaging German anti-tank positions and early panzer formations at useful ranges. For the first time since the start of the desert campaigns, British and American forces had a tank with enough firepower to crack open Axis defenses. The Grant variant, built for the British with a redesigned turret, was especially effective. Its disadvantages are easy to see: limited gun traverse on the main weapon, a crew juggling multiple weapon systems, and a profile that practically begged enemy gunners to take a shot. But in 1942, before the arrival of the Sherman, the M3 Lee was a vital stepping stone that kept Allied operations moving. The M3 Lee Grant ranks above the cruiser Mk because it offered something Britain desperately lacked early on: real, reliable, mid-caliber tank firepower. It might be odd-looking, but it carried the Allies through one of the toughest phases of the war. Up next, a British tank that didn't look powerful, but its reputation on the battlefield was anything but weak. The Valentine is the quiet overachiever of Allied armor: small, unassuming, almost cute in its proportions, yet one of the most respected tanks of the early war. Designed as an infantry tank, the Valentine wasn't meant to sprint across open terrain or execute dazzling maneuvers. Its job was simple: survive, support infantry, and provide consistent firepower. And survive it did. Thanks to its thick armor and low silhouette, the Valentine was famously difficult to knock out. Crews often praised it for keeping them alive, and mechanics loved it for being one of the most mechanically reliable tanks Britain ever built. When a vehicle is so dependable that the Soviets, who were notoriously blunt in their evaluations, call it excellent, you know you've done something right. Its main flaw was predictable: firepower. The early 2-pounder gun lacked high-explosive shells, limiting its effectiveness against anything but enemy tanks. Later versions improved this with the 6-pounder, but space constraints meant the turret often had to lose a crew member, reducing efficiency. Still, the Valentine earns its number 6 ranking because it consistently performed above expectations wherever it served. In North Africa, it held the line when other British tanks struggled. On the Eastern Front, it earned a reputation as a dependable workhorse in harsh Soviet conditions. It wasn't fast, it wasn't flashy, but it was tough, reliable, and beloved by crews, and that alone places it above the chaotic engineering of the M3 Lee Grant. But now, we're entering the top 5. Tanks that weren't just reliable, they were game changers. The Churchill tank feels like a contradiction: slow, boxy, and looking more like a mobile bunker than a true armored fighting vehicle. And yet, this lumbering giant turned out to be one of the most resilient and versatile tanks the Allies ever produced. Its most defining strength was armor. The Churchill was built to absorb punishment, and it did so spectacularly. Many German gunners were shocked by how many hits the tank could take and still continue rolling. In some battles, Churchills returned to base looking like Swiss cheese, yet remained fully operational. That level of survivability earned it enormous respect from the crews who depended on it. But what really makes the Churchill special is its adaptability. The tank became the foundation for some of the most iconic engineering variants of the war. The Churchill Crocodile, a terrifying flamethrower tank that could clear bunkers and fortifications with unmatched efficiency. The Churchill Havre, armed with a 290mm petard mortar, firing the infamous flying dustbin demolition charge. Bridge layers, mine clearers, engineering vehicles, the Churchill could be modified into almost anything. Despite its poor speed and average firepower, especially in early models, the Churchill excelled in terrain where other tanks simply couldn't go. It climbed cliffs, crossed trenches, and smashed through obstacles that left faster tanks stuck or immobilized. The Churchill earns its Sucker 5 placement because it wasn't just a tank. It was a mobile problem solver. It wasn't the fastest or the most glamorous, but when the Allies needed something to break through a fortified position, the Churchill got the call. From here on, the tanks don't just survive or support, they dominate. And the next one marks the moment Britain finally created a fast, modern, genuinely competitive medium tank. The Cromwell marks the moment Britain finally fielded a tank that could compete with late war designs on equal footing. After years of compromise, unreliable cruisers, and undergunned infantry tanks, the Cromwell arrived as a breath of fresh air. A fast, reliable, and well-balanced machine that ticked nearly every box the British Army had been missing. Its greatest strength? Speed. Powered by the legendary Rolls-Royce Meteor engine, a direct descendant of the Merlin aircraft engine, the Cromwell could hit over 60 km/h on roads, making it one of the fastest tanks of the entire war. Crews often joked that the Cromwell didn't drive. It sprinted. But unlike earlier British cruiser tanks, the Cromwell paired its mobility with meaningful firepower. The 75mm gun offered a strong mix of armor penetration and high explosive performance, allowing it to engage both enemy tanks and fortified positions with equal effectiveness. The Cromwell wasn't perfect. Its gun struggled against the thick frontal armor of Panthers and Tigers, and its thin side armor made flanking attacks risky. But in real battlefield conditions, where speed, reliability, and combined arms tactics mattered, the Cromwell shined. It formed the backbone of British armored divisions during the Normandy campaign and the push through France and the Low Countries. What places the Cromwell at their fore is its balance. It was Britain's first modern medium tank, capable of rapid maneuvering, consistent reliability, and solid combat performance. After years of design missteps, the Cromwell proved the British could produce a tank that wasn't just functional, it was formidable. But even the Cromwell wasn't the final evolution. The next tank solved its biggest weakness and turned into a genuine Panther killer. The Comet is the tank that proved the British had finally cracked the code. Fast, well-armed, reliable, and compact, it took everything good about the Cromwell and fixed nearly all of its shortcomings, most importantly, firepower. The heart of the Comet's power lies in its 77mm high-velocity gun. Unlike the Cromwell's 75mm, the Comet's weapon could reliably penetrate Panther armor from combat ranges. This instantly elevated British tank crews into a new tier of battlefield capability. For the first time, they could confidently challenge German late war designs head-on without relying on specialized vehicles like the Firefly. And the upgrades didn't stop there. The Comet featured improved armor, a fully redesigned turret, a lower and more stable gun mount, and better crew ergonomics. Combined with the beloved Meteor engine, it remained one of the fastest medium tanks in Europe, able to reposition, flank, and exploit breakthroughs with unmatched agility. Its only real flaw? Timing. The Comet arrived at the very end of the war, limiting its impact. Crews adored it, commanders praised it, and German forces respected it. But there simply weren't enough battles left for it to rewrite history. Still, the Comet earns the number 3 spot because, pound for pound, it was one of the finest Allied tanks ever built. If it had appeared in 1943 instead of late 1944, it might have dominated the European battlefield. But now we reach the top 2, and these tanks weren't just excellent. They shaped the entire outcome of the war. The next entry is the workhorse that carried the Allies from North Africa to Berlin. The M4 Sherman wasn't the biggest, toughest, or most powerful tank of World War II, but it was exactly what the Allies needed to win. Reliable, mass-producible, and adaptable, the Sherman became the backbone of American, British, and Commonwealth armored forces from North Africa all the way to the gates of Berlin. What made the Sherman exceptional wasn't a single standout feature. It was the combination of many good ones. Unmatched reliability, even in desert heat, Italian mud, and French bocage. Excellent mobility, allowing it to support infantry and exploit breakthroughs. Crew survivability, thanks to thoughtful internal layout and upgrades over time. Standardization in logistics, which meant spare parts, repairs, and support flowed like clockwork. And then there were the variants, dozens of them. The 76mm armed Shermans improved firepower significantly, while the legendary Sherman Firefly, fitted with the British 17-pounder gun, became one of the most feared Allied tanks, capable of knocking out Panthers and Tigers at range. But the Sherman wasn't without weaknesses. Its armor could be penetrated by late-war German guns, and its high profile made it easier to spot. The Ronson myth of constant fires was exaggerated, but rooted in early ammunition storage issues that were later fixed. Against heavy German armor, the Sherman often needed numbers, tactics, or specialized variants to win. So, why does the Sherman rank so high? Because it didn't need to be the best tank one-on-one. It needed to be the best tank for winning a global war. And on that front, it delivered spectacularly. Built by the tens of thousands, shipped across continents, and operated by crews from half the Allied nations, the Sherman was the machine that kept the Allied advance moving forward. But even the Sherman couldn't claim the title of the most important Allied tank of the war. That honor belongs to a revolutionary design that shocked the German army and changed the entire course of tank development. The T-34 isn't just the best Allied tank of World War II, it's one of the most influential tanks in human history. When it first appeared in 1941, German commanders were stunned. Nothing they had in service could match its combination of sloped armor, firepower, and mobility. It was the world's first truly modern medium tank. The T-34's armor was revolutionary. Its sloped 45mm plates provided effective protection far beyond their thickness, allowing the tank to shrug off hits that would cripple other designs. German troops described early encounters with the T-34 as shocking and terrifying, prompting an urgent re-evaluation of their own armored doctrine. But armor was only half the story. The T-34's wide tracks and powerful V2 diesel engine gave it unmatched off-road performance. Where other tanks bogged down in mud, snow, or deep terrain, the T-34 simply kept moving. On the vast Eastern Front, where roads were often non-existent, this mattered more than raw speed. Then there was firepower. The early 76.2mm gun was effective against most German tanks of 1941-1942, while the later T-34-85, with its three-man turret and high-velocity 85 gun, restored Soviet parity against Panthers and Tigers. But the T-34's greatest advantage wasn't any single feature, it was production. The Soviet Union manufactured tens of thousands of them, even under brutal wartime conditions. Simpler to produce than Western tanks and easier to repair in the field, the T-34 allowed the Red Army to equip entire armored armies and overwhelmed German forces both in quality and quantity. Crew comfort was poor, visibility was limited, and early models were rough around the edges. But none of these flaws stopped the T-34 from becoming the spearhead of the Soviet counteroffensive that pushed the Wehrmacht back from Stalingrad, across Ukraine, into Poland, and ultimately to the gates of Berlin. The T-34 earns the #1 spot because no other Allied tank matched its combination of innovation, battlefield impact, production scale, and historical significance. It didn't just fight the war, it helped decide it. And there you have it, the full ranking of the top 10 Allied tanks of World War II, from the weakest pre-war relics to the machine that defined an era.